Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and I'm so excited today to bring you my top 10 science fiction books as of 2020. So I just think that it's really fun to make these kind of lists, and ideally I'd like to redo this list in the future on my channel because I think it would be a really good chance to see how my reading tastes have changed. And while these are my top 10 books right now, I'll be honest, I could see this list changing a lot in a few years. So in order to give this video some structure, I did give myself a few rules to follow. First, only one book per series just to keep it interesting. As well, there's going to be no novellas, short stories, or graphic novels. These are all proper science fiction novels that I'm going to be listing here. And I also like to do a few things. So full disclosure, I'm actually recording this at the beginning of 2021 before I've gotten into my reading year because I do not want to include any books that I read in 2021. I think it's more fun to wait for year end, and I don't want to ruin the surprise for my best of the year list. So instead, these are actually books that I read prior to this year. And I've got to be honest that I'm going to be ranking this from 10 to 1 being my favorite, but this was really hard to do because I do love all of these books. And even in the minutes before this, while I was setting up my camera, I was switching around a few things. So keep that in mind that by the time you're watching this, chances are I would rearrange them again. But I think it's fun to do a ranking order and just attempt to do so. And again, then I can look back in the future and see how things have changed, what stays a favorite, and what, falls to the wayside over time. Hopefully this is a lot of fun to watch. Let's get into the actual books. First up at number 10, we have Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant, which is a book about a mockumentary crew that go to film a fake documentary about mermaids. However, something goes wrong and they disappear in the Marianas Trench. And so this novel follows a crew that goes in afterwards to find out what happened. This is technically a science fiction horror book, so I could include it in a horror list, but when I think about this book, I'll be honest, I do think about it first and foremost as a piece of science fiction, and that's because there's so much biology in it. I remember reading it and forgetting that mermaids were not real because the science behind it all seemed so factual. And I love that Mira Grant brings so much into this story in terms of that realism. And of course, the horror aspects did not hurt the book at all. I do enjoy a good creature feature, and this one definitely has some violent and gruesome moments. At its core, it's really a very character-driven story, and you get some fantastic diversity with characters of different background being featured in this. And I just found myself very connected to the characters, which works really well in both science fiction and horror because, of course, you care very deeply for their well-being. And I just think that this book did a fantastic job of accomplishing everything that it was trying to do. Love it so much. I feel like I'm constantly talking about it in recommendation videos, but it's because it fits into so many topics well, and it really is a favorite, so I can't help myself. I want to keep recommending it to all of you, and definitely deserved a spot on this list. Then at number 9, we have Before Mars by Emma Newman. This is technically the third book in the Planetfall series, but it can be read as a standalone. I do recommend going back to the beginning, but this book is just fantastic on its own. It's my favorite of the series, and this particularly follows one woman that is going off to work on Mars. When she gets there, she finds a letter in her own handwriting warning her that something is wrong. I really like this story for not only the mystery aspect, and that is something I love in science fiction, is I love when it crosses over with mysteries and thrillers. And this one had some really good suspense because I did not know what was going on, and the reveals in this book were incredible. I actually recommend reading this one before reading the second book after Atlas, because in my mind the reveals in this book are so much better, and I don't want the second book to spoil the experience you can have with this one. That being said, what really put this book on my favorites list was the main character and her position as being a mother, because this book is framed around the idea that she goes off in this mission even though she has a husband and a young child that she is leaving behind. And I like that Emma Newman goes so far as to make this very very unpopular choice for her character and makes her possibly unlikable to a lot of the audience that might be reading this. Because the idea that a mother would choose her career over her child, and again, I believe her child is just a toddler or maybe even younger, and all she gets is this delayed video feed of her husband sending her communications, and she is missing out on those key years. And as someone who is a mother themselves, but also wants to have a career, wants to have a life and an identity outside of that, this book spoke to me on so many levels. And again, I like that it challenges the role of motherhood, and I like that it goes to places that other authors just would not be willing to go to. And I think that it does it in a really nuanced way and creates a really good conversation. Highly recommend this one. Now at number 8, we have Foe by Ian Reid. This is a story of a couple living out in an isolated farmland when someone comes there and tells them that the husband needs to go on a journey somewhere far away in space and they are going to be separated. This is a very quiet piece of science fiction. Often it is described or classified under suspense, but again, for me, given the background of the story, given that it involves a futuristic setting and space travel, I do feel that it fits into the science fiction genre enough for me to include it on this list. I absolutely love this book. If you don't know, I love Ian Reid as a writer. He brings a lot of literary talent to the genre, and his prose, his characters, everything is just so subtle. This book is very quiet. There is not a lot of action. If you're looking for space battles and alien invasions, you're not going to get that here. Instead, it's very quiet. You're trying to figure out what is going on, what is happening. And even though I started to figure it out as I went along, I just very much enjoyed the journey. I love the relationship between the couple. You'll find that something I really like in books is representation of interesting, complex, and realistic marriages, and I really saw that here. So another book that I feel is underrated, not read enough. I love his other book, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which is oh so much more popular, but this one definitely deserves its due. It's definitely one to reread, and I love it dearly. Then at number 7, we have Moon of the Crusted Snow by Wabashik Rice. At the beginning of the story, something happens in the wider world. However, we only know what the indigenous population on this reserve know. And that is the fact that the cell towers have stopped working, their electricity is turning off, and they know that something is wrong, but at first they really do not know what is happening. Eventually they do start to learn a little bit more, but more so than the apocalyptic event itself, this is a story about a community and what they need to do to survive. So I do need to acknowledge that this book is very light on those science fiction details. If you're looking for a detailed account of what this apocalyptic event is, you're not going to get that with this story. But the setting again has enough of that apocalyptic elements that I felt comfortable to include it on this list, at least in this round. I'm curious how I'll feel about it down the road, but I love this story so much because I really think it's reflective of the experience of being an Indigenous person in Canada on a reserve. You get to see the good and the bad, the sense of community and family. I feel that this book is very nuanced in how it handles some very difficult subject matter, and it creates a good sense of suspense, or at least unease, because you worry very much for these characters. There is again a lot of talk about survival, rationing supplies, and so forth. And it was a very short read, and I just hung on every word. I thought the writing was incredible. I definitely want to read more by this author. And it was just this tight, suspenseful story, but again, in that science fiction setting that just gives this possibility of what if that in some ways has become so much more possible in this day and age. And absolutely love this book. Definitely, again, one that more people need to be reading. Then at number 6, we have The Relentless Moon by Mary Robinette Kowal, and this is the third book in the Lady Astronaut series. While this is a little bit more of a companion book, I do recommend going back and reading the first 2 books first before getting to this one. This particular book follows a female astronaut named Nicole who is sent off to go work on the moon. There is something happening and she has to basically solve a mystery of whoever is possibly sabotaging the space missions that are happening. And I once again really like when science fiction crosses over with those mystery elements, because she is trying to figure out who she can trust and trying to figure out how she can determine who who is behind everything, and we as the reader are going along for the ride. There is a good amount of suspense, and at the same time, with the entire series, there is incredible character work. I really like the character of Nicole, actually more than the original main character of Alma, and I just thought that she was such a strong woman. She was fierce and logical and just the right amount of emotional for me. I also really appreciated the inclusion of her eating disorder as part of the plot, particularly not that she was in the throes of an eating disorder, but recovering from one. And this book goes into the fact that it's something that she needs to continually protect herself against. She needs to continue to eat, even when times are hard. And I think it's a story that we don't see enough in fiction, let alone science fiction. And of the 3 books, this one is definitely my favorite. I do really enjoy the other 2, but this one, The Relentless Moon, is the reason that this series is on this list, because I thought it was head and shoulders above the other 2 in the fact that it was just so strong, and again, one that I feel like does not get enough praise, does not get read enough, because the first 2 books can read as a duology, and if you've only read those and you haven't read this one, I really feel like you're missing out on an amazing story. I loved it so much. Again, suspenseful, exciting, and I just loved every minute of it. Please go check it out. So at this point, we have made it to the top 5 and we are into the good stuff. The next book I want to talk about is Under the Skin by Michelle Faber, which is a piece of speculative fiction that does involve elements of different genres, but there's enough science fiction that I felt comfortable to include it on this list. And this is a story of a young woman who goes around driving her car in the Scottish Highlands, picking up hitchhikers for her own mysterious purposes. It's a book you do not want to know too much going into. It's really one you want to experience yourself. So I'll leave the plot there, but there's so much I love about this book. First, the writing is fantastic. I've really come to appreciate more literary science fiction. You'll notice there is a lot on this list, and it's for a reason. This book deals with some incredible themes. I don't want to say what those are because of spoilers, but oh my goodness, it really made me rethink things that I had never considered before, which really does say a lot. And I just found this book to be oh so suspenseful, because while I'm putting this in the science fiction category, it definitely has moments of being a thriller, because you know that this woman is not picking up these hitchhikers for a good reason. There is something very wrong happening, and you just have to find out what that is. This book is so clever, it's so smart, and it's just the kind of book that when you finish it, you will keep thinking about it. I would love to see any other book that just does something similar to this, and I just, yeah, love this book so much. Again, it's so hard to talk about without saying anything, so just trust me, read it for yourself and let me know if you love it as much as I do. Then at number 4, we have Escaping Exodus by Nikki Drayden. This is the start of a new space opera series, and at this point I've only read the first book, but by the time you're watching this, I probably have read the sequel. But in this story, it is set in a far-flung future where people have left Earth, and now they're living inside of creatures that they basically hollow out and use for their own purposes until the creature dies off, and then they go on to move into another creature and start the process again. The story is told from 2 perspectives of a young woman who is the daughter of the matriarch of the society, and so she is going to be tasked with ruling soon enough, and then also her love interest, who is a beast worker, so someone who literally is carving out this beast in order to make it into a home. This book is so fantastic for so many reasons. It deals with a lot of court politics, which is not something I normally like in my science fiction because it does have more of a fantasy feel to it, but in this case it worked for me. This book deals with a lot of gender issues because it is a matriarchal society, so you do see how men are looked down upon, and I think that creates some interesting conversations. This book also deals a lot with class because you get to see the ruling class versus the working class, and there's just some really interesting politics, conversations that come about in a book like this. There's also a lot of romance, which is normally not something you would see me talking about in one of my favorite science fiction books. There is a variety of different sexual situations that occur both between men and women, and they have polyamorous societies where they have multiple people in their family groupings. This book is also very weird. There are some tentacles and some strange sex scenes, all of that. So just keep that in mind, that this book is actually fairly adult, even though it actually reads like a book that does have some YA crossover appeal. But then it goes to some strange places and you realize that no, it definitely belongs in the adult category. So honestly, very different than the books I normally enjoy, but this book just captured my attention, loved it so much. And yeah, definitely among my favorites. Then at number 3, we have Raven Stratagem by Yoon-Ha Lee, which is the second book in the Machineries of Empire trilogy. This is really a stand-in for the entire series because I really do love all these books, but particularly this one was my favorite. This series is a military space opera that primarily follows a young woman, an officer, who decides to tether herself to the soul of a dead general who is known as an amazing strategist. However, he was also known for possibly being crazy. He made some terrible choices and definitely caused some loss of his own people, but at the same time, he was known for always winning his fights and winning those battles. And so she decides to bring in his expertise, and the story goes from there. This is one of the most complex stories I've ever read. There's a lot of hard science fiction, and it's just a book that does not spoon feed you information. Instead, the world building is incredibly complex, and I'll be honest, I need to reread this book, this whole series, in order to fully understand, or at least understand more of what is happening. They talk about a calendar system, and their whole military strategy is based off of geometry and other forms of mathematics, and it is so complex. But despite the fact that I was horribly confused during the first book, I loved it so much. This book has incredible character work, and once you realize that these books are really about the characters and it kind of clicks, which is what happened in book 2, I just fell in love with it, because particularly the dead General Zhidao is such an amazing character. He is so complex, and how you feel about him will change with every book in the series, and I can't think of another series that does that so well. This book just has some of the most morally complex characters, and you just find yourself changing your mind on who you're siding with, who you like, who you don't. And the part of this book that no one ever talks about is the fact that these books are hilarious. Particularly, again, this is the fact that I'm highlighting this book because in book 2, I realized that Yoon-Ha Lee has an amazing sense of humor and he weaves it into his stories. I do think there was some humor in book 1, but I was so overwhelmed by the world building that I think I missed out on that. But once you realize what's happening and all the jokes that are being put in, this book is hilarious, and the third book is equally so funny. There's some amazing twists and turns. There is just great plot progression. And again, love the trilogy so much, but if I had to pick one book and put it on this list, it was definitely this one. Highly recommend it. Even if you struggle with the first book, keep going. Book 2 will just make you fall in love with the trilogy. Then at number 2, we have The Martian by Andy Weir. I figured just about everyone knows the plot, but of course it's about an astronaut who gets stranded on Mars and has to figure out how to survive while NASA tries to figure out how to bring him home. This book I love for so many reasons. First off, the humor. When I first heard about this book, I was reluctant to pick it up because I thought it was going to be really sad and depressing because it was about a man who was, doomed to die on Mars. But once you pick it up, you realize that the main character is foul-mouthed and just survives by making a joke out of everything. I really fell in love with the story. And of course, for me, I love the fact that you're constantly seeing him try to puzzle his way out of these terrible situations. You get to see him farming potatoes and just turning these terrible situations into different solutions. I think that the author did a fantastic job of bringing a lot of hard science to a layperson audience in a really accessible way. This is one of the first books that really introduced me to hard science and made me realize that even though I don't have a science background, I can still love these books. And in fact, I can actually learn a lot by reading these kind of books. Even though they're fiction, there is so much factual basis in what is in here. And yeah, I love it so much. It is suspenseful and funny and just so worth reading, so worth rereading. It does not get old. and yeah, definitely among my all-time favorites. Then finally at number 1, we have Caliban's War by James S.A. Corey, which is the second book in the Expanse series. I had to do the rule of only including one favorite per series on this list because otherwise The Expanse would have been probably about like 7 of these books, but I absolutely love the entire series and it's really close between several of the books, so I definitely could have included Leviathan Wakes here or possibly Nemesis Games, but I think I want to go with this one, Caliban's War, because it introduces the character I love, Avasalia, the older woman who is foul-mouthed and is a politician who just gets things done. I think she is brilliant and so smart. This, of course, is an epic near future science fiction space opera where we have expanded to the other planets, but not much past our own solar system. This book involves fantastic politics and tension between Earth, Mars, and the Belt. And I just think it does a really great job of being an exciting space opera thriller, bringing in elements of horror and mystery and at times noir. And really at the heart of this series is the characters. I care so deeply for the crew of the Rossi and the extra cast that comes in, like I said, like Avasalia. And I just think that this series is so well done. Each book ups the stakes and brings something new. The humor in this book is spot on and it is funny without ever breaking the tension, and I just love the series so much. This honestly was one of the first series that introduced me to adult science fiction, and it still holds up on reread. I am of course filming this before getting to read the final book, Leviathan Falls, which I strongly suspect will be another contender among my favorites in the series. But until then, I'm saying it's Caliban's War, but highly recommend the whole series. If you have not picked it up, please do so. Even though these books are chunky, you will fly through them, and everyone who picks them up loves them so much. There's a reason that they are just favorites, and yeah, they're definitely among my favorites. I think it will take a really special book to knock these books out of my number 1 slot if I redo this list in future years. So that is it for this video. Let me know down below what you think of the books that I highlighted here. Which ones are you planning on picking up? And more so, I would love to hear what are your favorite science fiction books. You can do a top 10, or if it's easier, just give me a top 3 or a top 5. We can compare and see which books we have in common and maybe add some more books to my own TBR. Again, I would love to redo this video in the future and see how my tastes change over time. You'll definitely see that some commonalities. I do enjoy some literary science fiction. I love some science fiction with elements of mystery or suspense. And if you're interested in another top 10 list, last year I did this for horror, so if you missed that video, I'll have it linked below and in the cards. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I read a lot of science fiction as well as fantasy, thrillers, and horror. And you can still help me out by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing it around online, and hitting that little notification bell. Thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.